Should we move to Texas? Texas has the second highest population, and it's the second largest state by landmass, with over 160,000 oil wells and 85,000 gas wells. Some of the best Mexican-American cuisine, Houston and San Antonio, Dallas, Fort Worth, and of course everything is bigger in Texas. We're gonna break down the state and understand why so many people are moving to Texas, and understand, really, is Texas a place worth moving to? Because after all, some of the fastest growing cities in the country are now in Texas, with a highway system that is unmatched. Many people are concerned, disregard for any type of environmental issues, and willingness to do anything to obtain and exploit natural resources is turning the state into an eyesore. In Texas, massive profits are more important than aesthetics, and nothing gets in the way of the economy. The state's preferred vehicle is an F-350 because after all, these natural resources are plentiful here. Does turning a state into a complete eyesore of towers and oil rigs benefit everybody in the state or just a select few? You'll learn that the entire state has electrical posts, oil rigs, and all types of chemical plants scattered throughout the entire landscape. And while we need these resources and infrastructure, would you rather live in a place of natural beauty that's preserved, like the state of Florida, or in a place like Texas where utilitarian use and extraction of resources is the primary land use? The northeastern part of the state really resembles the Deep South culturally. We're looking at footage from Texarkana. This looks like a scene from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, or somewhere else in the Mid-South. This part of the state is a confusing place. While being part of Texas, it really has a very southern feel. For the most part, this region is scattered with small towns, and the Hispanic population here is not as large as in other parts of the state. Houston area, one of my favorite places in the entire country. This part of the state is known for its diversity, its Mexican-American culture, and for having incredibly large highway systems, massive skylines, a good economy, affordability, where black, white, and brown are all the same because you're from Houston. Houston, Texas is a massive influencer in the world of music, from its famous chopped and screwed hip-hop, artists like Paul Wall and Mike Jones, and nearby Corpus Christi, Selena was a leader in Tejano music, which spread throughout Latin America. Cumbias and corridos are still being made in Houston, Texas. Houston is a cultural hub and an influencer shaping the styles and sounds that are spread as American culture throughout the whole world. Beautiful suburbs like Katy, right to the west of Houston. Katy, Texas was one of the most diverse places I've ever been to. It's just outside of Houston, and there's a lot of diversity here. Katy, Texas is definitely the place. I definitely recommend it. And I've known people who've lived here, and they said that they really enjoyed their time there and they wouldn't mind moving back if they had to. For the most part, the Houston area is just a giant urban complex with highways spanning in all directions and never-ending suburbs plagued with large chemical plants. We spoke to some of the locals in Texas City and Baytown, and they are very concerned for their health and are considering leaving the area as soon as they're able to afford it. The only effect that these chemical plants are having is just a negative one on their health. While Houston has a Latino influence, the Dallas region is known to have a large Asian population, and just like Houston, it is a large hub and one of the largest metropolitan areas in the country. What I saw in the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area was just raggedy looking places, a lot of homelessness and addiction, neighborhoods that were kind of run down, really old houses, a lot of gang graffiti, lots of just really hood looking environments. And while every city has that, and Houston has that as well, it just seemed like Dallas, Fort Worth looked like a really depressing and sad place to me. The hoods in Houston and San Antonio seem to have more life and less depression. Part of that may be because it's in the northeast part of the state, which, like I said, kind of resembles the deep south. And while Texas has a Gulf Coast coastline, for the most part, it's not really sightly until you get to about Padre Island. Other cities like San Antonio have a lot less of those unsightly chemical plants. 2.3 million people call the city of San Antonio home. And to the north, are areas stretching into Austin that are some of the fastest growing in the country. San Antonio is definitely my favorite area in the state of Texas. It has a very cool suburban feel. You're 2 hours away from the Mexican border, and many wealthy Mexicans, predominantly from the area of Monterrey, which is only 2 more hours into Mexico, call this their home. While the city of San Antonio does have its fair share of bad neighborhoods, the outskirts on the outside of the city are beautiful suburban places with a lot more vegetation and rolling countryside, giving it somewhat of a natural feel, something that a lot of places in Texas seem to be missing. It's a massive metropolitan area with a huge highway system just like Houston. About 45% of the metropolitan area is Hispanic, so you know their Mexican food is on point. No particular city in Texas is perfect. They all offer something different. If you're looking for diversity and wealth, they say that some of the Dallas suburbs are the best. If you want to be near the beaches, somewhere along Padre Island or Corpus Christi could be the best, but incomes there are less. And then there's Midland, Texas. This is a far to the west region of the state where oil production is the heaviest. And scenic beauty is the absolute worst. This is absolutely one of the ugliest cities I've ever seen in the country, where everybody drives an F-350 and has a big rude attitude. I would definitely recommend Houston, Dallas, or San Antonio to moving to this far west crappy place called Midland, Texas. Despite the income stats and having some of the highest population growths, I would really recommend you go somewhere that's more cultured, like Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, and not end up in this barren wasteland called Midland, Texas. At least with Houston, you're not too far from Galveston where you can see the water. And if you go with Dallas, Texas, or San Antonio, these cities have a lot of culture. But when you go with Midland, Texas, you're just looking at a pale skyline, aggressive drivers, and just one of the nastiest urban settings I've ever seen in the country. It's downright depressing, and being in a desert, it gets really, really hot here. All you see is gray, giant F-350 trucks. Absolutely one of the most depressing cities I have ever seen. despite having a growing population and despite having good incomes, I would not advise you to end up in this barren wasteland. I'm not saying Galveston is a special place. It's definitely not one of the best beaches along the Gulf. In fact, there's a few problems from traffic congestion to just, again, all these power poles and oil rigs and all the other crap we talked about are right there in Galveston. But at least you can see some palm trees and get to see some water. You're not going to get that if you end up in one of these desert-like places in the western part of the state. I would definitely recommend you stay with the south central part of the state, Houston or San Antonio, or even as far north of Dallas. Not to hate on Dallas and Fort Worth, but I really did like Houston a whole lot better. But that's still a whole lot better than ending up in the far west part of the state where everything is just centered around oil and that's it. And I understand that oil production is key for the state's economy, and a lot of people eat off this plate. But too many other people complain that it's destroying their health. And it seems like these companies are almost taking over towns and regions and devoting it exactly to one land use. That is scarring the land and pretty much devoting the entire region to look something like this. Very unsightly and very unlikely to be good for your health. People complain of respiratory problems. And a lot of people in the Houston area told me that if you have respiratory problems like asthma, you don't want to be anywhere near the Houston metropolitan area. In particular places like Texas City and Baytown, the residents always mention that they have a hard time breathing. As you can see here, literally chemicals and all types of hazardous waste is just put out into the air so everybody can breathe it. And the communities that are adjacent to these types of areas are pretty much run down and poor, since at the end of the day, who wants to live near that? Now, an area that I really loved in Texas was the area around Corpus Christi, where Tejana music legend Selena is from. The beaches here are almost as good as some of the beaches in Florida, and the vibes are definitely more tropical with more palm trees, but the incomes are ridiculously low. Corpus Christi has one of the worst incomes of any metropolitan area, and then since nothing in life is ever perfect, the pretty areas like Padre Island with good beaches seem to have the worst incomes. The beach was almost as good as our beaches in Florida. Then I looked at their statistics and I was like, crap, there's really no income here. I loved it, and I just feel like the fact you can drive on the beach is amazing. Awesome coastline. And people here have a saying, it is, we didn't cross the border crossed us, since they have generationally occupied this area since before Texas was part of the United States. But some people say that the proximity to the Mexican border can sometimes be a problem. If you're a local, I would love to hear your opinion, and please be honest. So the truth about moving to Texas is that it's a place of a lot of Hispanic American culture where you should feel comfortable if you're a Latino. The western part of the state feels like it's part of the west, and the northeastern part of the state feels like it's in the deep south. Place where people like to drive lower trucks and giant F-350s. With relative affordability and fast-growing cities, it's an attractive place for a lot of people. But if you're a nature lover, I will strongly give you a warning. A place like Florida might be better suited for you, since the vast majority of the landscape is kind of dry and arid and pretty much featureless. There's a few areas between Austin and San Antonio that have a little bit of kind of rolling hill country. This area is beautiful, and if I were to end up in Texas, I'd want to be near there. The promises of high incomes in the western part of the state, near the area of Odessa and Midland, would not convince me to move to this barren wasteland. It's hot enough in the shade. Who the crap would want to work on an oil rig in this unbearable heat? All the money in the world could not convince me to move to this barren wasteland called Midland, Texas. And despite having a lot of work opportunity, cost of living is still relatively high, even though you're pretty much practically in the middle of nowhere. And then on top of that, you gotta deal with the arrogant attitudes of the people who choose to live here and drive an F-350. Overall, I like Texas a lot. It's got a lot of faults and it's got a lot of pluses. But I can guarantee you, if I ever move to Texas, it will be a place that has some type of vegetation far away from Midland. Usually when we criticize a place on our videos, the locals get very angry. In the case of Midland, they didn't even deny it. They were like, yeah, pretty much it sucks out here. We're saving some money so we can live somewhere better in the future. Hopefully we don't become desperate alcoholics in the process, since there's pretty much absolutely nothing to do out there. So if the lure of high incomes are still attracting you to this area of Texas, go ahead and turn on your heater and watch this scene for like half an hour. The fastest growing region of Texas is between San Antonio and Austin. Anything east of 35 is a barren wasteland. Anything west, you get up into the hill country, it's a little bit prettier. This is the fastest growing area that I have seen anywhere in the United States. Despite being a massively growing area, I really wasn't fond of it. To me, most of it looked like a barren wasteland, and I didn't really understand why so many people would want to live in a place like this. Austin, Texas, and the surrounding area seem to me like it's missing life, culture, and identity. It seems like everything is fake, plastic, and it's one of those places that people are moving to in huge numbers, but the area is really lackluster, missing a lot of personality. Along 35 is a massive amount of construction, and the place looks like an absolute barren wasteland. You really gotta go a little bit further west to find yourself in more attractive areas with natural settings. Unfortunately for us, on our trip, we were on Interstate 35, and this area, while fastly growing, is an ugly, scenic area. You gotta go a little bit further to the west, and I hope that on our next trip we can check out areas like Canyon Lake and get to see some of the better parts this region has to offer. The area along the US-Mexico border is probably an area I would also say you should pass on. Right, so there it is. That is the truth about moving to Texas. I hope you guys liked this video. Un gran saludo a toda mi gente linda, bella de Texas. Los quiero mucho. Y algún día puede ser Texas mi próximo estado, because I've said this on our channel. If I had to leave Florida and go to any other state, Texas would be on the top of my list.